everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, right before we started recording, you said a phrase that made me very, very, very upset. That phrase was the name of a current college football recruit named Freddie Lennox Jr. Tony, why would you make me feel that old? I feel personally attacked.
Because if I had to see the name and feel old, then Tom, I had to let you also see it, and I had to make other people aware of it as well, because misery does enjoy some company, and I thought that's a name that will provide exactly the type of misery that I was looking for.
I feel like we need to hurry up and get through this show so that I can go have dinner at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, because that's just how my life apparently is now. Like, I'm sorry, we have to get this done quickly so I can watch Matlock before we go hit the early bird. Like, this is, I was not emotionally prepared for that name. That was rough.
Yeah, Tom, you just lean into it now, but don't lean too far because you'll fall and break your hip. So you just be careful on that walker. Get those tennis balls on there, and really, have some mobility, but also stability. So, Tom, today's show, we have over the spring, we got to look at the incoming Ohio State freshmen, the already enrolled freshmen. So I thought in today's show, let's talk about the guys who are going to be joining the Buckeyes in June when they arrive from their various hometowns and high schools. And we just talk about those guys, go over them out, what we think, what we expect, things like that. So there's 10 guys coming in, and rather than just go one by one, I thought, that you look at it, and I thought we'd break it into threes, because you got 3 skill guys in running back Dallan Hayden, receivers Kaleb Brown and Kojo Antwi. You got 3 offensive linemen in Tegra Tshabola, Carson Hinzman, and Avery Henry. 3 defensive linemen in Hero Kanu, Omari Abor, and Kenyatta Jackson, and Sonny Styles, who is like 3 players all in one. So I thought we would just break this into threes and discuss our expectations. And so I want to start with the skill positions, where you've got Dallan Hayden, the number 26 running back in the nation, 5'11", 195 out of Memphis. And then the receivers, Kaleb Brown, a 4-star guy, number 13 receiver out of Chicago, a very different kind of receiver than Ohio State has used in the past. They've had similar guys, but they haven't used them. And then Kojo Antwi, the number 26 receiver out of Sewanee, Georgia, number 150 player overall. And for me, I'd like to start with Kaleb Brown, because he's a guy, like I said, they've had similar guys, Mookie Cooper, where they've Jalen Gill, even like Tyjon Lindsey, who they didn't have, but tried to have. But the difference, like Kaleb Brown has played running back as Jalen Gill did. And so this is kind of and Paris Campbell as well, but they've gone away from that. And now they've kind of come back to it a little bit. But Kaleb Brown just wasn't just a running back. He played slot receiver. He did that. So I think he's going to come in a little bit ahead of the game. But it is interesting to me that they've got a guy who's 5'10", like 195, pretty stocky guy, can break tackles. And with the Ohio State offense being as creative as it is, I'm interested to see how they use this guy as more than just maybe the slot receiver, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Garrett Wilson type.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned all those different names, and I mean, Wan'Dale Robinson was someone else who they were in on for a long time, might have even been committed. If not, he was very close. They were in on him for a long time. I remember him visiting, and then he ended up ultimately at Kentucky at the college level, and then is off to the NFL now. But Kaleb Brown is an interesting fit for this team, because you're right, he very much does not fit the mold of what Brian Hartline has been bringing in recently, which, if you look at how Ohio State's recruiting on the defense at the wide receiver room, any other position group, you might go, well, maybe they had to reach for someone. Like Brian Hartline doesn't have to. Brian Hartline just sits there and people come to him. He doesn't have to reach for anything. His room is, who are the guys who Brian Hartline really wants, and Brian Hartline really wanted Kaleb Brown. So I'm going to be really intrigued to see where Kaleb Brown fits in with this team, because 5'10", you don't think of that as being someone who's big enough to be one of the outside receivers. They're not recruiting the 6'5", 6'6" guys anymore, but 6'2", 6'3", that's about what you're looking for outside. If you were listed 4 inches shorter than that, well, a lot of times guys who are listed at 5'10" are actually, 5'9" and 3/4, or maybe a little down from there, shall we say. We call that the Tate Martel rule. He's I have not stood next to Kaleb Brown in person, so I cannot tell you exactly how tall he is, but it is interesting to me to see Hartline go away from the mold of what has been very successful, and that tells me he sees a lot of ability and a lot of opportunity with Kaleb Brown that he couldn't pass up.
Yeah, and we know they do want to continue to use the jet sweeps, as we've seen. Garrett Wilson has done it. Jackson Smith-Njigba has done it. These guys will continue to do it. I've talked about, when we've discussed these guys before, Kojo Antwi, I think I've said he reminds me of KJ Hill. And you think about KJ Hill, would KJ Hill have been offered under Brian Hartline? And he wasn't necessarily, I don't think he was an under the radar guy, and he wasn't a 3-star guy by any means. I think he was a top 200 player or so. He was an Arkansas commit. But the explosive numbers aren't really there. He's very similar guys, like 6'1", 190 each of them probably. And that's what Kojo Antwi is listed at. And I don't know exactly what Kojo Antwi does. Like, what are his stellar traits? And the thing is, it's like, well, he just does everything well and makes things look easy, a lot like KJ Hill. And I remember talking to Brian Hartline a few years ago when discussing all of their receivers that they have. And I said, we don't talk about KJ Hill enough, do we? He's like, no, nobody talks about KJ Hill enough. And all of the different things that he can do. He's not going to run a 4.35, but he still ends up being the all-time leading receiver in Ohio State football history. And so I guess if that's the low end of a comp, of a comparison of a comp, then I guess Kojo Antwi is bound for stardom. But this is where you're just, Brian Hartline knows, and there's certainly more to just a guy than a 40-yard dash and being 6'2" or 6'3" or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, the comp there of KJ Hill to Kojo Antwi is eerily similar. Kojo Antwi, 6'0", 6 foot tall, even, 190 pounds. KJ Hill's recruiting profile, 6 foot tall, 188 pounds. So you're 2 whole pounds off there. Kojo Antwi, the number 150 overall player in his class. KJ Hill, the number 153 overall player in this class. So, Tony, you were way off with that comp. That's not even, I mean, I'm surprised they play the same sport. It's crazy. KJ Hill, I was trying to think who on the current team, like on the, returning players who we've already seen, you would comp him most closely to. He's maybe a less explosive Jackson Smith-Njigba, but you just think about KJ Hill, it was just like, he just caught everything. That's kind of like the Jackson Smith-Njigba probably a little bit more of a big play guy than KJ Hill. But, if you're in that conversation, and, we'll see what Kojo Antwi looks like when he gets to campus. There are lots of 6 foot tall people who do not catch footballs as well as KJ Hill or Jackson Smith-Njigba. So we'll kind of continue to monitor that one. But, if you're in that kind of area of wide receiver, if your skill set matches up somewhat closely to that, that's a pretty good, that's a pretty important piece. That's someone who gets thrown a lot of footballs in a lot of big moments. I mean, it felt like there were a lot of 3rd and 7s that went to KJ Hill over the years. If that's the kind of role he can fill, if Kojo Antwi can fill for Ohio State this fall, he's someone who, that would be probably not this fall, but down the line a little ways. That's a huge piece. That's someone who's going to make a lot of big plays where you at home are jumping off of your couch and signaling first down in the living room when no one else is there. But he's someone who I think if you went back to last year when all these guys signed, we did a who's going to be the first to do this and who's going to be the first to do that. I think I had Kojo Antwi picked for 1 or 2 things where it was like, he's not necessarily going to be the first wide receiver off the board in the NFL draft 4 years from now, 3 years from now. But he's someone who I think statistically, could go down as one of those really important players in Ohio State football history. Just in terms of like big plays, big impact, big moment kind of person. even if that doesn't necessarily translate into like number 2 overall pick in the draft.
I like that we've already established unrealistically and terribly unfair to the player that his basement is KJ Hill, his ceiling is Jackson Smith and Jigba. And it's interesting because Jackson Smith and Jigba, like, I don't know that his measurables aren't anything special. He's 6 foot 190, and I don't know what he runs. People will say, well, he's not as fast as Garrett Wilson, and he's not as fast as Chris Olave. But when we watched him in high school, like, well, this guy is different. He's just different. And then we see him the first time in spring ball, and it's like that everything was confirmed at that point, and everything continues to be confirmed. And so, again, that was another Brian Hartline thing where there's something there, and then everybody else caught on eventually. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with Kojo Antwi. I don't know that we'll see much more than 4 games out of him this year. Quickly then, with Dallan Hayden, I watched everybody's highlights again today just to refresh myself. And if I tell you he reminds me of Boom Herron, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think that's a good thing. I mean, that's sort of a running back who that's a running back who fits a role that they don't necessarily have on this team. So that's an opportunity to potentially have a role that you're filling. I mean, Boom Herron was not Beanie Wells, but Boom Herron had a pretty darn good Ohio State career. So yeah, I mean, again, you're going to talk about setting unrealistic floors. Like, well, let's look up Boom Herron stats. Like, well, that's the baseline for what you're going to have here. That's Tony. First of all, how dare you?
That is my fault. He will be somewhere between a Jamal Berry and J.K. Dobbins, somewhere in that range. And if he's not, then that's his own fault, and he should learn from that and his future endeavors. The offensive line, so they've got 3 guys, as we mentioned, coming in, and I was really impressed watching Carson Hinzman again. One of the things I like about him, he's the number 9 interior offensive lineman. They expect him to play somewhere guard or center. I like the fact that he's already playing guard. He's not one of these tackles that they'll have to move inside. Like he has been a guard, and he's been a guard in the state of Wisconsin, Tom. So the first good sign is he's a guard who's played guard. Second, he's an offensive lineman from Wisconsin that the Badgers wanted. You put those 2 things together, and I like what he's going to be. He's listed at 6'4", 280 on 24/7, and so he's going to be able to put on the right kind of weight. But I just like the fact that he's already got the experience on the interior, and he's not one of these guys that had to move from left tackle to inside, and nobody ever thinks he's going to like he plays tackle in high school, but don't worry, he's never going to be a tackle in college.
Well, and yeah, I mean, to me, the thing that's most impactful there is kid from Wisconsin who Wisconsin wanted. Like, Urban Meyer, I remember Urban Meyer talking about, looking at, how Michigan State, like there's certain teams that evaluated offensive linemen really well, because offensive line is a tough position to evaluate. And there's certain teams that, when a certain program expresses an interest or makes an offer on an offensive lineman, you at least kind of, okay, let's give this guy a little bit of a closer look. What do they see here? It's, it would be like a baseball team and the Tampa Bay Rays call about some prospect in your like minor league development camp. It's like, all right, what do they know that we don't know? And, I think Ohio State has improved its offensive line evaluation over the years, but, still like that's a little bit of a, okay, there's probably something here. What is it there? And yeah, he's someone who, you don't, coming in at 280 pounds, you are not ready to play guard in the Big Ten at 280 pounds, but you spend a year developing, especially coming in the summer. Like you're not gonna play this fall in any meaningful amount of time. So, but you have an opportunity now. There are a bunch of guys who are going to be potentially leaving after this year. You're going to have an opportunity to, both guard spots could quite likely be open this time next year if Donovan Jackson kicks out to tackle and Matt Jones goes pro. You're going to have an opportunity there to potentially be, in that mix for playing time or a starting role a year from now. If you, to your point, if he puts on the good weight and, continue, kind of develops a little bit, at the college level, he's someone who could be, I don't expect to see him playing any meaningful amount of snaps or starting or anything this fall, but he's someone who could be, in that mix for playing time a little earlier than a typical offensive lineman.
And talking about tackles who moved to guard, Tegra Tshabola, listed as the number 10 offensive tackle in the nation, number 104 player overall. Has had to drop some weight, still listed at 6'5", 344 on the 24/7 site. I think maybe there's a possibility for a right tackle spot for him. Like, I think there's concerns, and there have been concerns about him for the better part of a year or so about whether or not he can play tackle. And he's a guy that I think would have been helped by coming in this spring, but not everybody can do that and pull that off. And then Avery Henry as well. Like, he's one of those developmental, you take a shot and he either becomes just somebody that ends up in the portal in a few years, or he becomes, maybe he's DeJuan Jones. And you like to have one of those in a class every year. The problem is when you've got three of them.
Yeah, and I think they don't really have. I don't think they have three of them this year. They have had three of them in the past, where it's it's a little bit of a lottery ticket, because there's some ways that this goes incredibly well. There's some ways that it's just that there's a reason he was the number 56 tackle in the class, and a lot of that, so much of that is projection. It's like, well, okay, how are his feet? Okay, how is his lateral quickness? And then we've heard Mickey Marotti talk about what he's looking for in terms of being able to put good weight on a guy, or being able to bulk a guy up or whatever. Avery Henry is definitely one of those guys who, like, if you ask me, like, to rank the most likely guys to redshirt this year, he is probably number one on that list with a bullet. Like, not even a question, because he's not someone who necessarily fits a spot where they don't need anything desperately immediately. And offensive line in general is a spot where it's generally a developmental position. So, he's probably a little bit of a, like, this always reminds me of like Trey Larue. And Trey Larue, this was kind of the spring where it was like, okay, let's see what Trey Larue is. He's kind of been, he showed up 2 years ago. You knew it was going to be a multi-year project. Trey Larue, unfortunately, this spring had a foot or ankle injury, so he was in a walking boot for the spring game, so we didn't actually get to see where he is in his progression right now. Avery Henry, to me, feels a little bit like a, go ahead and just set a note in your phone for April 14th, 2024, or whatever the week of the spring game is that week, and, like, remind me, how is Avery Henry doing? Like, that feels kind of like, we'll see. You always hear people talk about, oh, this guy's a reach. Oh, this guy's ridiculous. Why would Ohio State offer this guy? Like, to your point, like, DeJuan Jones was like a nothing prospect until about December of his senior year, and then was, still around after early signing day, and then became, all of a sudden, a lot of big programs were like, well, we could use a tackle. All of a sudden, like, Ohio State and Penn State are chasing this guy. And, he's another guy who it's like, oh, you look at him and it's like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, yes, he's huge, but he can't, is he really going to be able to play tackle at this level? And then this year it was, he's a returning starter. And the question was not, can he play tackle? The question was, will he be back or will he be off to the NFL? So, sometimes this really works. Sometimes this really doesn't. And just, like, check back 24 months from now and we'll see how Avery Henry's doing, basically.
I do like thinking back to when Urban did talk about the Michigan State recruiting and their projection, and just imagining, like, Jim Bowman offered this guy. Okay, what does Jim Bowman see that we have not? And then just pouring through your head, like, what is he seeing from this person other than the fact that they can play all five positions and counts as three recruits with just one body and that sort of thing.
Can pull on power. That seems like the number 1 through number 5 requirements. Yes.
Plus, his actual name is Dave.
Perfect fit. What an NIL deal. Oh, man.
No, you cannot have deals with your own players. Like, you can't. So let's move to the defensive line, Tom. Hero Kanu, the 4-star number 19 defensive lineman out of California by way of Germany, or is it Germany by way of California?
Germany by way of California, yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Tom. And you got to see him in person last June, and when I see him, he's listed at 6'5", 293, and you're like, where are these 293 pounds? Because there are times where he looks like a defensive end, because, like, he's still coming into his frame, and it's, he's been playing, I think, since the spring of 2021, basically. Like, I was reading his bio again, and so California they did not have a 2020 fall season. They had a 2021 spring season and then a 2021 fall season. So he played 2 years of high school ball in that 2021 season. And that's right. Like he got to California like right before the season, coming from the European program that he was in. And he's just really explosive, and he's still learning. And it's going to be really interesting to see what he looks like in fall camp with being so new to the sport. But what did you think when you saw him?
He was just one of those guys who, he's not like a big fat guy. He doesn't, you will see defensive tackles where it's like, yeah, that guy's got some work to do in the weight room. And that's something that I can definitely say as someone in perfect shape. So that's, I can definitely judge others in that way. Yes. And that's totally okay.
Especially younger people.
Exactly. But he doesn't look, he's not like enormous, but he's, in person, he's a large human being in a way that, Ohio State football players are large human beings. And then you see him move, and it was just quick, sudden, those were kind of the words that I remember thinking when he was, watching him working with Larry Johnson last summer at one of those camps. And when he was at camp with Ohio State, he was there with his whole, and you mentioned the program he was with, they brought over a ton of kids from Europe, and I cannot for the life of me remember the name of the program right now.
Is it Pro Potential International? It's PPI or something like that?
It's something like that, yeah. And so it's this group from Europe, and they all came over, and they were just basically doing the circuit. And then, on Tuesday, we're going to be at Ohio State camp, and Wednesday, we're going to be at Michigan camp. And they were at Ohio State camp on that Monday or that Tuesday, whatever it was. And then the next day, everyone else had gone to Michigan, and Hero Kanu was still in Columbus. It was like, that's interesting. That's probably a pretty good sign for Larry Johnson. And then he ended up signing. He actually signed in December, and then ended up, kept it secret, and then announced it at one of the All-Star games in January. He's someone he's really intriguing, and the athleticism is there that you could see him being someone who makes a pretty early impact, but also the fact that he's been playing football for such a short amount of time, you figure the learning curve is going to be a little bit steeper, where he's going to improve quite a bit between his freshman year and his sophomore year, maybe even more than other people who have been, been a little more schooled in the fundamentals over the last, say, 6 to 8 years. So it'll be interesting to see how quickly he can make an impact. He's someone who, it would not shock me if he was on the field in some kind of way this fall. That's not a spot where they need, neither of the defensive tackle spots are really places where they desperately need depth right now. But, it wouldn't shock me if he was able to get on the field in some form this year. But if he doesn't, if it's kind of like a learning year for him, that's not a red flag to me at all, based on the fact that he's so new to this whole football thing.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued how that's going to happen, because he might just be this wild horse who does not yet know how to run, but still wins races. And it's like, well, just imagine when his skill has been built and has been trained properly to do all of these. Larry Johnson talks about the toolbox, and he starts getting these tools in his toolbox rather than just going on physical, natural abilities. And that's where I don't know if at that point, he has no shot this year because he doesn't know what he's doing, and he only has, minimal training, or if it's just one of those things where guys some guys just have it. And so I think the guys that just have it, I think that's more fiction than fact. I think that's more make-believe at times, where he's just a natural, and there aren't a lot of naturals. That's why The Natural is a fictional movie, I believe, and also a fictional book. But we'll see. And then, so I was watching Omari Abor and Kenyatta Jackson, two defensive ends. I think kind of different players. Abor listed at 6'4", 240, a little bit more compact, and Kenyatta Jackson 6'5", 235. And it sounds like they're about the same, but when you look at him, Kenyatta Jackson has some length, and he looks like he's going to obviously will have to get bigger. I don't know if this is a Texas versus Florida thing, Tom, but when I was watching them, Omari Abor is very, he's more, not timid at all, but he's more patient, and there's more run defense maybe in Texas. I don't know, because Florida, Kenyatta Jackson just goes after the quarterback. Whatever happens after that, he doesn't care. He just, and I remember that was kind of like Ryan Shazier's thing, where you just, because I remember seeing him as a defensive end, just a rush, and you put the fastest guy as close as you can to the quarterback and send him. And, Kenyatta Jackson just goes after the quarterback, whereas Omari Abor is like, I also have to play the run. I've got to read the quarterback. I've got to be disciplined. And I don't know if that's just the styles of football or just the styles of defense at those respective schools. But I think two guys where I don't know how much need there is for either of them this year, but also the defensive ends that Ohio State have not lived up to their billing in terms of the older guys. And you start to wonder if their snaps will start to give way to younger guys. And I know they're going to give way to Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau. But can any of these Abor, Kenyatta Jackson, can they come in and start to just like follow through those cracks and get some snaps as well?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily expect both of those guys to have 30 snaps a game, kind of 20 snaps a game kind of seasons, or I think probably I'm going to say one of the two of them redshirts. Which one redshirts? Well, I don't know. One of the two of them. So it's interesting because I thought the same thing watching them on film, where Kenyatta Jackson is 1 inch taller and 5 pounds lighter, but they look like different people. Like Omari Abor just looks like a much bigger dude. He's just people always say built different, and they mean that in like a I don't sleep, or I'm at the gym at 3 a.m. Like he just looks more solidly built than Kenyatta Jackson. I don't know really how to explain it, but if you watch their film, I think you will probably think the same thing I do. But yeah, it feels like one of them is going to have an opportunity, but it's going to be based on a mixture of what they do when they come in this summer and this fall, but also what some of the other people do. Is Tyler Friday healthy? Is Javonte Jean-Baptiste, making his, more of an impact on the field when he gets his snaps? What does Zach Hamilton look like? Zach Harrison. I don't know who Zach Hamilton is. Zach Harrison. What does Zach Harrison look like? I mean, you've got, and it feels strange to say that JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer are two people who I feel like we kind of know what you're going to get out of those two, more so than some of the veteran guys. But you've had some thinning of the ranks in that room over the last year, where Darian Henry Young hit the transfer portal, Kamonta Hamilton hit the transfer portal, Noah Potter hit the transfer portal. I mean, you've had a couple guys who have left, where now the path to the field is a little bit easier for at least one of them. And I guess we'll find out this fall which one of them it is.
Well, even, with Hero Kanu, I was doing did my spring recap of the defensive tackles on Monday, and they've got basically 3 guys at each spot, and then Hero Kanu will be the 4th at either nose tackle or 3 tech. And can Jaden McKenzie hold him off at 3 tech? Can he become the 3rd 3 tech in that rotation? I think it's possible. And then does he play? And that's going to be a question that, will depend on how he practices, but the depth chart, their needs. Tom, I want to move to Sonny Styles, who Jim Knowles has said will start out at safety, and why shouldn't he? He's the number 1 safety in the class, number 12 player overall, reclassified from 2023. I don't like the reclassifications in terms of getting the most out of a player, like getting 4 years or whatever, because I don't know how ready they are to play a year early. We saw Tony Grimes, corner from the Virginia, North Carolina area, went to North Carolina, reclassified, ended up doing really well, and I think started maybe the entire season for North Carolina. I don't see that same thing happening with Sonny Styles, but he's a guy who can, 6'4", 215. When you're standing there with him, as we have, the 6'4" seems believable. Watching him on film or highlights, he seems more like a 6'2.5". I don't know if it's usually the opposite, where like, you finally get to eyeball him in person, and you're like, you're not 6'4". Like the first time I saw Caden Curry, I'm like, you are not 6'5", you're not 6'4", but he was still the best player on the field by far. And so I know I've had doubts about him at safety. I think the strong safety position that Ohio State will have with Jim Knowles, I don't have doubts about him being able to do something there, or at least getting a shot at it. But I think 4 games max this year, in my opinion. And with all of the safeties that they have, assuming Lathan Ransom is back at this point, you're going to have to find 4 games to play him, in my opinion.
See, that's really interesting to me because I would have had him as one of the less likely guys to redshirt based solely on special teams. Like, he seems like he is made to be a missile on special teams. And
I don't disagree.
With as seriously as they take punt coverage and kickoff coverage, and, some of this is going to depend on the strategy. Are they going to have a kicker, whether it's Parker Lewis or someone else, who can kick the ball through the back of the end zone, and that's what they're going to do this year? Or are they going to try and do the thing where they kick it down to the 5 and bait someone into to running the kickoff back? Because that may determine whether you feel it's worth spending a year on Sonny Styles eligibility. He doesn't feel to me like the kind of guy who's around for 5 years. Mm-hmm. So to me, that suggests you're going to play him on special teams if he has, if he's ready to play on special teams, coming in a year early, coming in this summer, all of that sort of working against him getting on the field. But in a lot of ways, special teams, he's a smart kid and he's a super athletic kid, and, stay in your lane on kick coverage and run down there real fast and knock the crap out of someone. Like, that's something that seems like, even coming in this summer, all of that is well within his abilities. And, covering a punt, it seems like very much all within his abilities. So I think you might just try and find a role for him because he's just too good of an athlete to keep off the field. I don't know if you bring him in solely to sit him for a full year. This is not Quinn Ewers where you're coming in August and then you got to learn the whole offense and it's like impossible to do. This is, there's a role for him. I don't think he's going to be starting at safety this year, but if you have him on special teams and you decide we're going to play him on special teams, and therefore during the course of the year, you're maybe starting to work him in more, whether it's in some kind of a linebacker role, some kind of a safety role. I mean, the next question you had on the list is who is the least likely to redshirt? I think he honestly, it's super counterintuitive, but I think to me, he might be the answer there just because of the special teams piece of it. And once you got the special teams piece, then you'll work yourself into the defensive rotation just because they know you've already used your gear, so you might as well use it.
I like that answer, and he is an effective kick blocker in high school. He's got really good length and speed and burst and all of that. So that's a pretty good thought that's what will keep him from being redshirted and also being valuable enough to be used and to burn that shirt. Because I'm with you. I don't think they're. I think with a lot of their players outside of the offensive line, and I don't know how often they think 5 years. So like, but they also redshirt a lot of guys, and so because that question, who is the least likely to redshirt? Because I can look at all of these guys and see if I were betting on each of them to redshirt or not, I am betting on each of them to redshirt. Now, betting on all of them to redshirt seems like, well, that's a 10-leg parlay, Tom. And I don't know which of them is the least likely because I think they're all likely, and that's like I'm flummoxed in terms of because if we say then Sonny Styles, he might be my answer as well but I was also thinking Hero Kanu just because of the athleticism and the possible need for him and the ability for him to, if he can show that he can be productive, then you got to start getting him in there. But like the least likely, I don't have an answer. And you're going with Sonny Styles then? Yeah,
I'm going with Sonny Styles because I'm with you in that I don't think that any of these guys is like 90% likely to not redshirt. I mean, I think you're at least close to even money on any individual one of these guys redshirting because they're, the offensive lineman, that's just a developmental position. So you just sort of assume it takes a very special player not to redshirt on the offensive line. The wide receivers, like either of the wide receivers, like I think Dallan Hayden probably redshirts because you got 3 guys ahead of him. The 2 wide receivers, they're a little like the defensive ends. Like one of them is not going to redshirt, I think, but I don't know which one it is. The defensive ends, one of them is not going to redshirt, but I don't know which one it is. Hero Kanu, like I think I would maybe have him as the second. Maybe. I mean, Mike Hall redshirted last year, but Tyleik Williams didn't. So which of those buckets does he fall into? There's I think a more likely than not, any of these individual guys does redshirt, but there are probably, by the time the season's over, 3 to 4 of them who we look at and go, oh, well, that guy didn't redshirt. How about that?
Yeah, which bucket does Hero Kanu fall into? Perhaps the Mike Hall, who enrolled in June rather than when Tyleik Williams enrolled in the winter. So then, who do you hope doesn't redshirt? And if you're just picking one guy, I'm probably going to go Kaleb Brown just because he's different. And so I like to see different. While also we obviously want to see Sonny Styles, want to see like Hero Kanu. But I think I'm going to go ahead and say Kaleb Brown with the promise that they actually use him in different ways. And it's time, Tom. It's time to bring the H-back back.
I again, I'm so intrigued by what they're planning to do with him. You very obviously have a plan. You're bringing him in, so you have a plan for what you want to do with him. So what is it? Where does he fit? And, he's someone who it wouldn't shock me if he redshirts just because we've done shows on the depth at wide receiver, and, you've got Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka and Jackson Smith-Njigba and Julian Fleming, and, you've got Caleb Burton was in this spring. You've got Cam Babb. You've got Jaden Ballard. There's 7. Xavier Johnson. You've got 7, 8 guys in. And who did I miss? I missed one of the wide receivers who was in this spring.
Keon Grays.
Keon Grays. Yes, Keon Grays. You've got 7, 8 guys who are coming in with a little bit of a head start on you. And there are only so many snaps. Trying to get 6 wide receiver snaps is enough of a challenge that I don't know that. You would really need one of those guys to be a real immediate impact, breakout, we can't keep this guy off the field kind of player.
Kick returner.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe that's where Kaleb Brown fits in. He's a kick returner. He's a punt returner, something like that. But if they want to pull Emeka Egbuka, if Emeka Egbuka is starting, maybe that becomes Kaleb Brown. That's how Kaleb Brown gets on the field, because you're not going to have your starting wide receiver also be a kick returner. We have seen them do that in the past, but generally that's somewhere where it's the next guy up is kind of the kick returner. So yeah, if he doesn't redshirt, again, a lot like Sonny Styles, special teams maybe plays into that.
So Tom, now we'll finish up by picking one surprise guy to not redshirt, and I am going with Carson Hinzman, because the depth issues on the offensive line, he could be a guy that, he's listed at 280. He's probably 290 by now, and, whatever. But I think the depth is a concern there, and he might just be one of those guys that Josh Fryer type, where even though I think Josh Fryer redshirted as well, but you get in and things click well, and he would be a surprise, Tom, and that's why I picked it.
Yeah, I don't know how many of these guys I would really consider surprises. The 3 offensive linemen and Dallan Hayden are probably the 4 that I would say would qualify as a surprise. Because any of the other ones, it's you could see that and it wouldn't be a complete shock. And of those 4 players, I think Hinzman is the right answer. Tegra Tshabola probably needs a year with Coach Mick to sort of rework some things, and Avery Henry is coming in. We talked a little earlier about Avery Henry is kind of a check back in 24 months kind of guy. And Dallan Hayden, unless you have multiple injuries at running back, they redshirted Evan Pryor last year. So you figure they probably would redshirt Dallan Hayden, and he'll get some carries against Arkansas State and Toledo and Rutgers and whoever else. You get your 4 games in, and then he's not necessarily the special teams assassin kind of guy who's going to lose his red shirt for that. So yeah, I think those are the only 4 that would be really kind of surprising to me. And of those 4, I think you're right. I think Hinzman is the most likely of those 4 kind of potential surprises to not take a red shirt.
Yep. Well done, Tom. Do you have anything else to add before we call it a day? Because we've gone through all 10. We've gotten our thoughts. I got your thoughts on some red shirts and where you've already laid claim. You've staked some semi-bold predictions on what is going to happen. So we'll look back on this. I guarantee you around January 19th, let's say. Just go ahead and mark that down. We'll come back and see how you did. Any other thoughts before we go?
How many touchdowns does Sonny Styles score from the 34-yard line this year?
Over under is 1.5.
In that case, I'm going to take the under. Call me a hater if you must.
Oh, I must. So that will then do it for this episode. I want to thank you all for joining us as always, and we will talk to you guys later.